Christmas at my mom's house used to feel like magic when I was a kid. Twinkling lights, cinnamon candles, the smell of pine from a real tree she insisted on dragging home every year, and that warm hush that settled over the living room while Nat King Cole played softly in the background. But this year, standing just inside the doorway, I felt like an intruder in my own family. I had driven up from Portland the night before, worn out from a brutal end-of-year deployment sprint at work and the long, icy drive, only to wake up that morning to what felt like a slap in the face dressed up in holiday wrapping paper. I'm 25 now, a software engineer. I work long hours, live on my own, pay my bills, handle my life, and don't ask for anything. I don't expect extravagance. I don't need flashy displays or over-the-top gifts. But I guess I'd allowed myself to expect a little more than a cheap, mass-manufactured heart-shaped keychain with "Love You Always" engraved into the aluminum back in a font that was already flaking off. It still had the tiny clearance sticker stuck to the bottom of the box, $2.99. I stared at it for a few seconds longer than I probably should have, not even registering the fake red velvet cushion it sat on, or the way the little box creaked when I opened it. Meanwhile, the moment belonged to my sister. Haley was standing outside on the snowy driveway, barefoot in her fuzzy slippers and screaming like she'd just won the lottery. Our mom stood next to her, tears in her eyes and hands clutched to her chest like she was watching her daughter graduate or get proposed to. And right there in front of them, with a massive red bow on the hood and the headlights blinking like it was smiling, was a brand new white Range Rover. No license plates yet. Just that temporary tag on the windshield and the unmistakable gleam of fresh paint, untouched leather, and $130,000 of financial favoritism parked proudly for the whole cul-de-sac to admire. Haley's voice cracked with joy, her arms flung around our dad's neck as she shrieked something about never expecting this, while I stood back inside, still holding the open box with the keychain. The ribbon slid from my lap and coiled on the floor like it didn't want to be associated with the gift either. I felt the edge of the cheap metal bite into my palm as I pressed it closed, breathing slow and deep like that could somehow settle the burning tightness rising up my throat. Our dad just sipped his wine. That's what he always does, drinks quietly and watches everything unfold like it's a movie he's only vaguely interested in. I didn't even think he'd notice me open my gift until I caught him glancing at the keychain, then looking away without saying anything. No expression, no reaction. Just silence. The Range Rover's engine roared to life as Haley hopped into the driver's seat and revved it, laughing, shouting, and filming a selfie video on her phone. I could hear her through the closed window. Her voice carried. My mother waved her arms dramatically and then ran to stand beside the driver's side door, pulling it open to adjust something. The two of them were talking rapidly, Haley giggling and Mom beaming like she'd just cured cancer. They didn't look back once. I sat back down on the edge of the couch, the wrapping paper crumpled on the floor around me, and set the little box beside a mug of lukewarm cocoa I'd made earlier. No one said anything to me. No one acknowledged that I'd just opened my gift too. No eyes turned toward me, no comments about how thoughtful it was, not even a half-hearted, "Do you like it?" It was like I wasn't part of the scene. Like I was just background noise. Haley had always been the golden child. She was the one who got extensions on curfews, praise for the bare minimum, and constant defenses from our parents for every poor decision she made. I was the one who followed the rules, kept to myself, did my work, and got told I was too serious. Too sensitive. Too independent. As if that was a bad thing. I moved out at 21 and stopped relying on them for anything because I figured that was what being an adult was supposed to mean. I didn't realize that in doing so, I'd basically made myself invisible to them. It wasn't about the money. Not really. I didn't want a car. I didn't want jewelry or some tech toy. Hell, a book or a scarf or even a personalized letter would have meant something. But the keychain? That was a message. That I wasn't even a consideration anymore. That all their energy, love, and generosity had one destination, and it wasn't me. They could have spent $10,000 and it wouldn't have stung this much if there'd been even a shred of effort behind mine. But there wasn't. Not even a note inside the box. Just that flaking, impersonal engraving that probably came from a machine in a warehouse in Shenzhen. The kind of gift you get a coworker you barely know during Secret Santa at the office. I watched Haley reverse the car with surprising confidence for someone who'd always relied on others to handle her life for her. She pulled back and again, showing off the camera system, parking assist, and voice-activated controls like it was an ad. My mom clapped and said, "She's so smart, like Haley had engineered the damn car herself." I was still sitting there, barely blinking, the keychain now in my pocket, pressing cold and sharp against my thigh like a secret I wasn't supposed to tell. Eventually, my mom came back in, cheeks flushed, beaming. She looked at me for the first time in 20 minutes and said, "Isn't it perfect for her?" I nodded, once, slowly, like someone nodding along to a song they couldn't hear. "And did you see yours?" she added, gesturing vaguely toward the couch. I wanted to say so much. Ask why she thought that was okay. Ask if she remembered that I existed. Ask what I had done to fall so far down the priority list. But instead I just said, "Yeah, I saw it." My voice was calm, controlled. Too calm, maybe. The kind of calm you have when you're not sure if you're about to cry or scream, so you do neither. She smiled like I'd thanked her, then turned away again to go find her phone so she could post pictures of Haley with the car. #blessed. #proud mom. #Christmas magic. And I sat there, silent, as the smell of roast ham drifted in from the kitchen, the sounds of laughter echoed from the driveway, and the dull ache of being completely overlooked settled in my chest, heavier than any price tag ever could be. Sitting there on the edge of that couch, the faint glimmer of tinsel reflecting off the untouched mug of cocoa beside me, I wasn't just holding back tears for the gift in my pocket. I was holding back a lifetime of moments just like this. Because the truth is, this Christmas wasn't an isolated insult. It was just the latest installment in a long, exhausting series of being pushed aside, made invisible, and expected to smile while doing it. I don't know why I still let it surprise me. Like, some part of me keeps hoping that maybe this time it'll be different, but it never is. It never has been. Haley has always been the favored one. I don't say that lightly or in some bitter sibling rivalry kind of way. I say it as someone who's had 25 years of evidence stack up until it could fill a courtroom. I remember being 13 and unwrapping my Christmas present under that same tree, watching Haley bounce with excitement next to me as she ripped through box after box. First the brand new pink bike with her name engraved on a little silver plate, then a tablet she wasn't old enough to fully understand but bragged about anyway, and finally a pile of carefully folded, glittery designer clothes that she wore to show off at church the next day. I got a library copy of a used novel, wrapped in dollar store paper, its spine cracked and pages yellowing, with a note from my mom that just said, "I thought you'd like this one." It still had the barcode sticker on it. Not even a bookstore find. Just a withdrawn copy from the city library, probably picked out in a rush. That day burned into my brain, not because I wanted the tablet or the bike or the glittery top Haley wouldn't shut up about, but because it was the first time I realized that being quiet, responsible, and low maintenance didn't earn you points in our house. It just made you easier to forget. When I turned 16, I didn't even get a cake. It wasn't that they forgot the day entirely, but it fell on the same afternoon as Haley's cheerleading banquet, and apparently that was more important. My mom told me as much in those exact words when I asked if we were still doing dinner like we'd planned. "Sweetheart, Haley needs more support right now. It's her big night." That was always the line. Haley needs more support. As if I had never needed it, or as if needing it meant you weren't worthy of it. I got straight A's that year. Every class. I was taking advanced placement courses while working a part-time job at the library after school and helping with chores around the house because Haley had a lot on her plate. When the report card came in the mail, I handed it to my mom, proud, nervous, wanting her to say something, anything, that made me feel seen. She glanced at it for less than 5 seconds, smiled, said, "That's great, honey," then folded it in half and left it on the counter while she ran out to pick Haley up from practice. That was it. No framed certificate, no dinner celebration, not even a mention at the table that night. A few weeks later, Haley passed her driver's test on the 3rd try, and the entire weekend turned into a celebration. Balloons on the mailbox. Dinner reservations. Instagram posts with long captions about how proud mom was of her determined baby girl. She drove around the neighborhood in Dad's old convertible with the top down, music blaring, laughing with her friends while I sat inside trying to finish an essay for my AP English class. When I got a full scholarship to college, every penny of my tuition, books, and housing covered, I remember walking into the kitchen with the acceptance letter in hand, my heart pounding with pride and anticipation. I'd worked for years for that moment, turned down parties, late nights, and distractions to get there. My mom was unloading groceries. I told her, barely able to keep the excitement out of my voice, "Mom, I got the full ride." She smiled vaguely and said, "That's wonderful," without even pausing to look up from the bag of spinach she was putting into the fridge. Then, not 5 minutes later, She launched into a story about Haley's upcoming dance recital and how we'd need to plan around it because her costume fitting was going to run long. When I got promoted at work a year ago, I called her because I thought maybe, just maybe, this time she'd show the kind of joy she always had for Haley's smallest achievements. I told her I'd been made a team lead, that I was the youngest on the team, and my manager had called me a standout. She said, "Oh, that's nice, sweetie," and then asked if I thought I could help Haley look at apartments when I had time because you're so organized and she really needs your support. It's like my successes never registered as real wins because I didn't need to be cheered on through them. I didn't cry on the kitchen floor about failing a test or stomp around when things didn't go my way. I handled my own life, and that seemed to mean that I didn't need attention, approval, or validation. Or maybe, in her eyes, I didn't deserve it the way Haley did. Haley, with her scraped knees and dramatic breakdowns and constant need for reassurance, always had a spotlight. I stood just outside its reach, clapping politely while she basked in it. People like to say that parents don't have favorites. That love is equal, even if it looks different. But love that goes unspoken, unnoticed, and unrewarded doesn't feel like love after a while. It feels like being forgotten in plain sight. I became the one who didn't cause problems, who didn't demand, who kept her head down, did the work, and hoped that maybe one day I'd be acknowledged the way Haley was for merely showing up. So no, that $3 keychain didn't surprise me. It was just a physical token of a truth I've been swallowing since I was old enough to understand what disappointment feels like. What hurt feels like when you're taught not to show it. What being overlooked feels like when your only crime is being self-sufficient. The keychain didn't start the resentment. It just confirmed it. And somehow, even knowing all that, it still hurt like the first time. I was still holding the edge of that couch cushion, my fingers dug into the fabric like it might tether me to the moment, when my mom walked back into the living room, cheeks flushed with excitement and the faint smell of cold air clinging to her coat. She barely looked at me as she brushed snowflakes from her shoulders and glanced down at the keychain box I'd pushed to the corner of the coffee table. With that familiar clipped tone she reserved for when she thought I was being dramatic, she said, "You should be grateful, Madison. Fair is fair." She didn't even sit down, just stood over me like she was delivering a lecture on perspective. The moment those words left her mouth, something shifted inside me. No tears, no screaming, no dramatic outburst, just a quiet, almost mechanical awareness that I had finally reached the threshold. That invisible line I'd been edging toward for years, stepping closer every time she asked me to understand why Haley needed more, every time my achievements were treated like chores on a checklist instead of moments worth celebrating, every time I gave more than I received and told myself that being the reliable one was its own kind of reward. I sat back slowly, barely moving, and felt my body go cold, not from the winter air, but from the kind of realization that lands like a final verdict in a courtroom you didn't know you were on trial in. "Be grateful," she had said, as if I hadn't spent the last 12 months clawing my way through the hardest year of my life, shouldering burdens alone because no one thought to ask how I was holding up. I thought of the 70-hour weeks I pulled at work, trying to keep pace in a competitive industry that chews people up before they hit 30, the weeks where I slept with my laptop on the edge of my bed because logging off felt like falling behind. I thought about the health scare in June, when I spent 2 terrifying nights in the ER alone, hooked up to monitors with no one in the waiting room, my phone silent except for one text from my mom that said, "Keep me posted," with a thumbs up emoji. I thought about Max, the golden retriever who had been with me since middle school, who died quietly on the floor of my apartment while I sobbed into his fur, too devastated to call anyone because I already knew how it would go. My pain would be met with a distracted, "Oh no," and a pivot to whatever minor inconvenience Haley was currently dealing with. "Fair is fair," she repeated, louder now, maybe because I hadn't answered. I looked up at her then, not with anger, not with pleading, but with this hollow, detached gaze I barely recognized as my own. What was fair exactly? That Haley's wants were treated as needs and my needs were treated as inconveniences? That I had spent years being the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't ask for anything, and somehow that made me less deserving? That I got a $3 keychain while my sister screamed in a luxury SUV bought with a straight face and filmed like it was a Hallmark moment? I didn't say anything. I just nodded once, a slow, robotic motion that seemed to satisfy her, because she turned and walked away to help Haley take more pictures by the car. The Range Rover's headlights flickered through the window again, illuminating the garland on the mantel like it was all part of some commercial I wasn't cast in. I picked up my phone, not because I wanted to distract myself, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. And there it was. Photos.
Dozens of them.
Haley in her new car, Haley hugging my dad, Haley posing with our mom under the wreath on the front door. My thumb hovered over the screen as I scrolled through the tagged posts, my name never mentioned, my face absent or cropped or blurred like an afterthought. One picture showed me in the background, handing my empty mug to the side table, but my face had caught a motion blur that made me look like a ghost. Another group photo had been carefully centered to cut me off entirely, my arm just barely visible behind my sister's shining curls and my mother's polished smile. It was like I had been in the room but never truly present, captured in pixels but edited out of the story they were trying to tell. I tapped on my mom's Instagram post from an hour earlier, the one she'd probably put together while I was still sitting quietly in the living room trying not to cry. The caption read, "Christmas is about family, and this year, I'm just so thankful that we are all together and blessed in equal measure. Hashtag gratitude, hashtag family first, hashtag equal blessings." Equal blessings. My thumb twitched.
Equal.
As if there weren't literal dollar signs parked in the driveway proving otherwise. As if being together was enough to erase a lifetime of disparity, of invisible milestones, of my emotional labor being chalked up as self-sufficiency and used as an excuse to keep giving more to the one who asked for it louder. I didn't even realize I'd stopped blinking. I just kept rereading that line, over and over, like maybe it would change if I stared long enough. Blessed in equal measure. It echoed in my head, louder than the music still humming from the kitchen speaker, louder than Haley's laughter drifting in from outside. It was so delusional it almost made me laugh, but all that came out was a hollow breath, tight in my throat and lined with something sharp that didn't quite make it to tears. At some point, I stopped hearing the sounds around me. The room dulled. People passed by, conversations floated overhead, plates clinked, a candle flickered near the window, and none of it reached me. I was there physically, still sitting on that couch with my back straight and my hands in my lap, the keychain still tucked inside my coat pocket like a small, shiny reminder of everything I was supposed to swallow. I was done crying over it. Done making excuses for them. Done pretending that silence meant strength. Because I finally understood, with bone-deep clarity, that no matter how hard I worked, how much I accomplished, how quiet I kept my pain, or how polite I stayed in the face of insult, it would never be enough to matter the way Haley did. I wasn't the one they worried about. I wasn't the one they made room for. I was just the one they left out of the picture. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I sat up in the creaky twin bed tucked into the corner of the guest room, fully dressed, alert, waiting for the silence in the house to deepen into that heavy, unmistakable stillness that only exists when everyone is deep asleep and the pretense of closeness has finally collapsed. I hadn't really slept, not even dozed. I had laid there for hours, eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of the night, the faint groan of the heater switching on, the wind pressing against the old window frame, and somewhere down the hallway, the occasional snore from my father's room. The house still smelled faintly of pine needles and overcooked ham, and every time I inhaled, I felt the weight of that air settle heavier in my chest. I didn't hesitate. I slipped my shoes on silently one by one, avoiding the loose floorboard near the dresser that had betrayed me in years past during late-night bathroom runs. My duffel was already packed and zipped, placed by the door like a soldier standing at attention. I didn't look around the room, didn't pause to take one last glance at the framed pictures of Haley's graduation or the dusty ceramic angel on the shelf above the headboard. I had already said goodbye to all of it, in my mind and in my heart, hours ago. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint blue glow of the thermostat screen at the end. The carpet muffled my steps, familiar underfoot even though it hadn't changed since I was 12. When I reached the stairs, I stopped, not because I was afraid of being caught, but because I knew what I needed to do before I left. Something symbolic. Something final. The living room was still aglow with the soft, hazy light of the Christmas tree. The strands of colored bulbs blinked lazily across the branches, casting uneven reflections onto the glass coffee table and the wrapped leftovers still stacked on the dining sideboard. The room was exactly as we'd left it earlier, like a still life of curated domesticity, carefully staged for appearances, but hollow once you stepped inside it. That same carefully arranged couch. The same woolen throw. The same polished brass stocking holders on the mantel that bore only 2 names, Haley and Mom, because mine had mysteriously gotten lost in storage 3 years ago and no one had ever bothered to replace it. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small black box, the one that had held the heart-shaped keychain. I opened it slowly, the cardboard hinge creaking in the quiet. The keychain glinted under the blinking lights, silver-toned, mass-produced, soulless. The engraving was shallow and already scratched, the kind of trinket that would break in a week or disappear into a drawer forever. But to me, it was more than cheap metal. It was a message, a marker, and I wanted them to see it for exactly what it was. I crossed the room and placed the box right in the center of the coffee table, facing outward, perfectly aligned. I adjusted it slightly, making sure the heart sat upright, catching just enough of the light to sparkle. Not buried under ribbons or tossed carelessly aside, not forgotten in the corner of a junk drawer. This time it would sit in the open, silent and sharp like a gravestone. For everything they never gave. For every time they pretended I didn't need anything. For every moment I smiled while bleeding inside. For every lie wrapped in glitter and posted with hashtags about blessings. I stood there for a moment longer, not to admire the setup, but to feel the reality of it settle into my bones. There was no turning back after this, and that was the point. I was done waiting for fairness. Done pretending I could earn my way into their affection by being the better daughter. Done being the quiet one who swallowed her grief so the house would stay peaceful. I slipped out the front door without a sound, gently pulling it closed behind me until the latch clicked. The air outside was bitter and still, the street blanketed in snow that glowed faintly under the amber hue of the street lamps. I didn't park near the house when I arrived, I never did. I had left my car 3 blocks away, a habit I'd formed years ago without fully understanding why, though now it felt like the most instinctual form of self-preservation I'd ever practiced. Like some part of me always knew that one day, I'd need a clean exit. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked through the silence of the neighborhood, past houses strung with Christmas lights and dark windows hiding other people's lives. My breath curled out in front of me in pale clouds, each step steady, measured, deliberate. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't even angry anymore. Just focused. Clean in my resolve. When I reached my car, I brushed the snow off the windshield with my sleeve and slid behind the wheel. The seat was cold, the engine hesitated before turning over, and for a moment I just sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the frost-glazed glass, watching my breath fog the inside of the windshield. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 3:07 a.m., and then at the hotel confirmation email open on my phone, already pulled up and ready. I'd booked it 3 days ago. A corner room in a downtown hotel with blackout curtains, room service, and no family pictures on the wall. I didn't know then if I would use it, but apparently, a part of me had already decided. I pulled away from the curb slowly, the tires crunching over packed snow, and didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had left what I needed to leave behind. No letter. No dramatic confrontation. Just a $3 keychain in the center of a room that had never truly had space for me. No more pretending. No more smiling through invisibility. No more being the family punching bag disguised as the dependable daughter. I was done. I woke up to soft white sheets, the quiet hum of central heating, and the faint scent of citrus from the essential oil diffuser the hotel must have set automatically before dawn. For a moment, lying there in the dim morning light filtering through blackout curtains, I didn't move. I just breathed. No shouting from downstairs. No clatter of pans. No forced holiday cheer. No underlying tension coiled in my stomach the way it always was in that house, waiting to be triggered by something as small as Haley complaining about her hair or my mom sighing in disappointment at something I hadn't even done. Just silence. Clean, uninterrupted, unfamiliar silence. I reached for my phone on the nightstand out of habit, bracing myself for the usual avalanche of family notifications, and paused when I saw the time, 9:12 a.m. I hadn't slept that late on Christmas morning since I was 10. The realization landed strangely, like a forgotten muscle stretching for the first time in years. I set the phone back down without unlocking it and pushed myself upright, letting my feet sink into the plush carpet, feeling the softness ripple under the weight of my steps. I wandered toward the window, pulling open the curtains to reveal a sweeping view of the city, glass buildings catching the pale winter sun, snow gathered in quiet drifts on rooftops and awnings, cars gliding slowly below like pieces on a board game. It was the most peaceful Christmas morning I'd ever experienced. Room service arrived minutes later, as if the hotel staff had been waiting outside my door with silver trays and white linen napkins. I had ordered the biggest breakfast on the menu before falling asleep. Eggs Benedict with smoked salmon, roasted potatoes, fresh fruit, pastries still warm from the oven, and a carafe of orange juice chilled to perfection. The waiter asked if I wanted champagne added to my order, and for the first time in years, I didn't hesitate or think about justifying a small indulgence. I said yes. When the door closed behind him, I poured myself a mimosa, the bubbles rising in a delicate stream, and took the first sip slowly, letting the cool, bright sweetness bloom across my tongue. I ate breakfast sitting by the window, wrapped in the hotel's impossibly soft robe, the city stretching beneath me like a private painting meant only for my eyes. Every bite tasted like reclamation. Every swallow felt like space opening inside me where heaviness used to live. There was a lightness in my chest that felt almost foreign, as if I'd finally loosened a knot I didn't know had been tightening since childhood. No one asking me to smile.
No one asking me to understand.
No one demanding I suspend my own needs because someone else's emotions needed prioritizing again. I took a photo through the floor-to-ceiling glass, a simple shot of the skyline, snow dusting the rooftops, sunlight catching on the high-rise next door in a soft golden sheen. I didn't add a caption. I didn't need one. The image said everything I wasn't willing to explain anymore. I posted it to my story, set my phone face down on the table, and took another long sip of my mimosa. The buzzing started almost immediately. A vibration, then another, then a rapid sequence that made the phone skitter slightly against the polished wood of the table. I didn't look. I just kept eating, cutting into the soft yolk of my eggs Benedict, watching it spill across the English muffin like melted gold. But the buzzing didn't stop. It built, short bursts, long vibrations, repeated alerts that stacked over one another in frantic waves.
Calls.
Voicemails. Texts. Notifications piling up like snow against a door. When I finally picked up the phone, it felt heavier than before. The lock screen was crammed with missed calls from Mom, Dad, and Haley. Dozens of texts, each preview more frantic and accusatory than the last. Where are you? This isn't funny. You ruined Christmas. Your sister is in tears. How could you do this today of all days? We woke up and you were just gone. This is so immature. We deserve an explanation. You scared your mother half to death. Not one message said, "Are you okay?" Not one message asked, "Why did you leave?" I scrolled through each preview slowly, my thumb steady, my heartbeat calm in a way that would have surprised me yesterday. The tone shifted from confusion to irritation to outright anger, building like a storm they were convinced I had caused, even though they'd spent years laying the kindling for it.
They weren't worried about me.
They were worried about the inconvenience of my absence. They were worried about having to explain it to neighbors, to relatives, to themselves. Haley's tears were mentioned 3 times. My name wasn't mentioned once beyond accusations. I set the phone aside and leaned back in the chair, letting the sunlight warm the side of my face. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't feel the familiar guilt or obligation knotting in my stomach. Instead, I felt a quiet, profound certainty settling over me like a soft blanket. I didn't ruin Christmas. I simply stopped performing in a holiday they'd cast me out of years ago. For the first time in my life, Christmas morning belonged to me. By late afternoon, the city outside my hotel window had begun to soften under the fading winter light, the streets slowly shifting from bright white to muted gray as the sun slipped behind buildings. I was still in the robe, still barefoot, wrapped in that deep and unfamiliar quiet that had taken root in my chest since the moment I walked out of my mother's house. I had watched the day unfold without urgency, without tension, without the constant pulse of bracing for something to hurt. But the moment I took my phone off silent, the noise came back with a vengeance. There were 27 missed calls and a wall of texts, all with that signature Cheryl energy, disbelief masked as concern, frustration thinly veiled as maternal disappointment. The most recent message wasn't even a question. It was a command. You need to come back here now and apologize to your sister. You have humiliated this family. No preamble. No softness. No consideration for the fact that I'd walked out of a house that treated me like a shadow with a pulse. Just a direct order, like I was still 16 and had to explain myself for not cleaning the kitchen correctly. My mother didn't ask where I was. She didn't ask why I left. She didn't ask if I was safe, if I had shelter, if I was okay. I stared at the message for a long time, letting her words sit like stones in my palm.
Heavy. Sharp. Careless.
Then, without pausing, I typed one sentence. A single line, clean and controlled, the kind of response that cuts deeper than raised voices or slammed doors. I sent it without rereading. I matched the value of the gift I received and removed myself from a celebration where I wasn't wanted. Delivered. I watched the message land and waited, phone in hand, not out of fear but to witness what I already knew would come next. The response came quickly, faster than I expected, like a spark igniting dry brush. Long paragraphs. Half-coherent sentences. Words in all caps. Guilt-tripping veiled as grief. She said Haley was inconsolable. She said I had ruined the entire holiday. She said I was selfish. That I was cold. That I didn't understand how hard she worked to keep the family together. That this had been our chance to reset, even though nothing about it had been different from any other year except that I'd finally refused to participate in my own erasure. There was no acknowledgement of the truth in my message. No recognition of what it meant to open a cheap trinket while my sister was gifted a luxury vehicle with a bow big enough to wrap around the lies they told themselves about fairness. No space made for the years I'd spent proving my worth in silence, hoping someone might notice without having to shout for it. It was just rage, her kind of rage. The rage of someone who believes that control and love are the same thing. That obedience is respect. That silence is agreement. So, I did the one thing that felt more powerful than any reply could. I held my finger down on her name, scrolled to the bottom of the screen, and turned on Do Not Disturb. Then I did the same for my father. Then for Haley. And finally for the family group chat I hadn't been part of in months, but had been re-added to at some point during the chaos. The screen dimmed. The noise stopped. I set the phone down, face up, daring it to light up again, knowing it wouldn't. Not until I decided it could. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was deliberate. It was heavy with clarity. I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't being petty. I was reclaiming my right to peace. They could scream into the void, fill it with whatever version of the story made them feel justified. Maybe that I was ungrateful, dramatic, cold-hearted, but I didn't have to hear it. I didn't have to perform the role of the understanding daughter anymore. The one who bends but doesn't break, who keeps showing up even when she's unwelcome, who gets less but smiles bigger to keep the illusion of balance. I wasn't an emotional hostage. Not anymore. My worth wasn't measured by the size of the gift I opened or the number of people who missed me when I left the room. It wasn't tied to how quiet I could be in my suffering or how well I could shrink to accommodate everyone else's comfort. It existed on its own, unshaken, undeniable. And for the first time in my life, I believed that. Fully. Without needing them to believe it too. It didn't take long for the second wave to arrive, this time dressed in faux concern and empty platitudes from voices that had never once spoken up when it mattered. I had just finished eating a quiet dinner alone in the hotel lounge, a soft glass of red wine still breathing next to my plate, when I noticed the cluster of missed calls from a number I hadn't saved but immediately recognized. Aunt Denise. My mom's older sister, the one who always stayed just close enough to be counted as family, but far enough that she never had to confront any of the dysfunction directly. The kind of relative who showed up for baby showers and bridal brunches but never once called to ask how I was doing when I had the flu for 2 weeks in college, and no one from home so much as texted to check in. I played the first voicemail just to hear how she'd spin it. Her voice came through with that syrupy cadence I remembered from childhood, the one she always used when trying to smooth over conflict without getting her hands dirty. She said she didn't know exactly what had happened, only that everyone is really upset, and that your mom is devastated, Madison, just completely beside herself. She talked about how Christmas was supposed to be a time for unity, for forgiveness, and how family is everything. Not once did she mention the Range Rover. Not once did she ask why I had left in the middle of the night, quietly and without a word, something so out of character it should have sparked genuine concern. Instead, she just kept repeating that you're all each other has, like that was supposed to erase years of imbalance, silence, and quietly endured exclusion. I didn't listen to the second voicemail. I blocked her number instead. She hadn't called me once in the past year. She hadn't reached out when I was hospitalized. She hadn't responded to the graduation invitation I sent 6 years ago. But now, suddenly, she had all the time in the world to involve herself, because I had stepped out of line, and the family equilibrium had been disturbed. I turned my phone back over and sipped my wine slowly, letting the bitterness bloom on my tongue as the messages continued to roll in. This time it was from my father. His tone was different from my mother's, less rage, more guilt. The text read, "Your mother is very hurt. She hasn't stopped crying. This was supposed to be a good day." Still, not a single word about the Range Rover. Not a word about the gift I'd received. Not a word about the years I'd sat quietly while Haley's mediocrity was celebrated like brilliance and my efforts were dismissed as expected. No acknowledgement of how Christmas had become a performance I was forced to support but never allowed to center in. Just the usual script, the emotional sleight of hand that turned my absence into a betrayal while sidestepping everything that had led to it. He was trying to make me feel responsible for my mother's pain without addressing the actual cause of mine. I stared at the message for a long time, the text swimming on the screen as my mind went flat with exhaustion. I hadn't cried. Not once. Not even in the car the night before, not while walking away from the house I grew up in, not even after the avalanche of accusations that followed. But that text, so carefully worded, so deliberately devoid of accountability, made something in me ache in a way that had no place to land. I wasn't surprised. I didn't expect better. But somehow, the confirmation that they were really going to try to turn this around on me, pretend it was all a misunderstanding rather than decades of accumulated neglect, that stung more than I wanted to admit. I sat back in the chair, let the low jazz from the hotel speakers settle over me, and opened the booking app on my phone. I didn't even think about it. I extended my stay by another night with a few taps. The confirmation email arrived seconds later, a soft ping that felt more like a sigh of relief than a transaction. I wasn't ready to go back to my apartment yet. I didn't want to return to the routine of pretending this didn't happen, pretending I could function normally while their voices still echoed in my head, twisting the truth into something palatable for them and unbearable for me. This room, this quiet, this solitude. It wasn't a vacation. It was recovery. A decompression chamber after a lifetime of emotional suffocation. They could keep calling, keep twisting the story, keep sending messengers to scold me for disturbing the fantasy they'd built. But I wasn't going to step back into it just to make them feel better about the roles they refused to admit they'd played. I didn't leave because I was unstable. I left because I had been treated as disposable for too long. And I wasn't going back. It was late afternoon, and the hotel suite had become a cocoon of calm I hadn't known I needed until I was wrapped inside it. The lights were low, the curtains partially drawn to let in the cool gray-blue light of the city skyline, and the only sound was the gentle tick of the analog clock above the minibar. I had just stepped out of the shower, the scent of bergamot and eucalyptus still clinging to my skin, when I heard the sharp, impatient knock at the door. 3 quick raps, not from a housekeeper or a room service tray, but the kind of knock that demanded attention, the kind that comes from someone who believes they're entitled to entry. Before I even reached the door, I knew it was her. I didn't answer immediately. I took a moment to steady my breath, to let the robe fall neatly around me, to ground myself in the stillness that had become my armor over the last 24 hours. Then I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to confirm what I already suspected. Cheryl, my mother, standing there in a heavy wool coat, cheeks red from the cold and fury, her hand still lifted, as if she were prepared to knock again. Her eyes scanned the room behind me before they settled on my face, with a mix of disapproval and determination. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped forward, pushed past me into the suite, like she owned the air in it. "You're staying here?" she said, her voice sharp with judgment, her eyes sweeping over the room's clean lines and modern furniture, like she'd just walked into a crime scene. "This is ridiculous, Madison. This is how you respond to being upset? Wasting money on luxury? Running away to some overpriced hotel, like some kind of drama queen?" I closed the door slowly behind her, not slamming it, not reacting, just watching her pace across the plush carpet toward the window, as if she had every right to be there. She turned to face me again, arms folded, her mouth tight with something between scorn and disbelief. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "I spent less on this suite than you did on Haley's car," I said, each word landing with the calm weight of a scalpel, precise and measured. She blinked, faltered for half a second, then recovered. "That's different. Haley needed it. She's just getting started in life. She doesn't have what you have." That sentence sat there between us like rot. "She needed it more?" I repeated, not as a question, but as a mirror. I let the words echo around the suite, bounce off the walls she was trying to fill with justification. "Of course. That's always been the line, hasn't it? Haley needs more. Haley needs attention. Haley needs help. And me? I was fine. I didn't need anything because I didn't scream for it. I didn't fall apart. I didn't make things hard for you." My voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. But it was steady and heavy and full of all the things I had never been allowed to say at the kitchen table, in the car, or in the quiet moments when I waited for her to notice that I had needs too. You have no idea what it's been like. I continued, spending your life performing strength while being completely invisible in your own family. Getting good grades, scholarships, promotions, and watching you clap for Haley because she remembered to show up. Sitting through birthdays that you forgot. Unwrapping gifts that screamed obligation while she unwrapped celebration. Always being the one who had to be okay, so she could fall apart. Cheryl didn't interrupt. She didn't soften. She just stood there, her coat still buttoned, her arms crossed like she was bracing against a storm she had created but refused to feel. You've always been stronger, she said finally, quietly, like it was a compliment, like it was some sacred truth that explained everything. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who had spent decades confusing endurance with love, who had fed one daughter's dependency and ignored the other's silence. And I said what I had never let myself say out loud, not once in all the years of swallowing hurt in the name of peace. I didn't need to be stronger. I needed to be seen. She flinched then, just barely. A twitch at the corner of her mouth. A shift in her stance. But no apology came. No acknowledgement. No unraveling of the mythology she built around fairness and need. Just silence. And in that silence, I felt something in me click into place. Not closure. Not forgiveness. But clarity. I had said what needed to be said. Whether she heard it or not was no longer my responsibility. She stood there in the center of my hotel suite, arms still crossed like a shield, her mouth set in that flat, unyielding line I'd grown up with, a line that signaled the end of a conversation before it ever truly began. But this time, I didn't shrink under it. I didn't search her face for softness. I didn't wait for her to say something real. I looked at her and felt nothing but certainty. I'm done, I said, my voice low and even, the kind of steady that only comes when something inside you has finally stopped bleeding. I'm done with holidays that feel like performances. I'm done being treated like an afterthought. I'm done pretending that this is a family I feel safe in. Her expression didn't change right away. She blinked, maybe waiting for me to add something more palatable, something that would pull it back, an apology, a nervous laugh, a retraction hidden in a softer tone. But I had nothing left to soften. I had carried this weight for too long, worn it like armor until it warped my posture and silenced my voice, and now that it was off my shoulders, I wasn't about to pick it back up again. She scoffed, one short, bitter sound, and then she stepped closer, like proximity would make her more right, more powerful. Don't expect to come back when you come to your senses, she said, eyes sharp, voice colder than the wind that had followed her in from the hallway. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I stopped expecting anything a long time ago, I said, and for the first time, I watched the words actually hit her. Her mouth opened like she might reply, like there was still one more defense to deliver, one more line about loyalty or how hard motherhood is, or how I misunderstood everything. But nothing came. She just stood there, suddenly uncertain, and that brief flicker of silence was the loudest thing she had ever given me. I walked to the door slowly, each step light and final, and opened it without looking back. She stood there for another second or two, then finally moved, brushing past me with that same indignant air she always carried when things didn't go her way. No goodbye. No closing words. Just footsteps retreating down the hall, each one a little farther from whatever bond we used to pretend existed. When the door shut behind her, it didn't slam. It clicked softly, like the end of a chapter. And then it was just me. The suite was still, the light outside fading into dusk, the sky painted in soft hues of violet and steel blue. I stood in the middle of the room and let the silence stretch out, listening to the hum of the heating vent, the distant sound of a car horn several floors below, the gentle thud of my own heartbeat finally slowing in my chest. Something deep inside me exhaled. I hadn't left for drama. I hadn't spoken for attention. I hadn't demanded anything I hadn't earned 100 times over in effort, patience, and silence. But now, finally, I had drawn the line, clearly, cleanly, without anger but with absolute certainty. I chose myself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. Out of love, the kind that no one else in that house had ever offered me without conditions. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running. I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt rooted in something stronger than obligation. I felt light, not the kind of fleeting, hollow lightness that comes from denial, but the kind that comes from release. A final, solid shift in gravity. The years I had spent trying to prove I was enough, trying to earn space in a family that only made room for one daughter at a time, had ended here, in a hotel suite I had paid for myself, in silence I had chosen, in truth I had spoken out loud. I wasn't coming back. Not to be fixed. Not to be forgiven. Not to be reshaped into someone smaller and easier to dismiss. That door had closed. And I was finally, truly free. The days that followed didn't rush in like a tidal wave or collapse into dramatic breakthroughs. They came quietly, one after another, soft and unfamiliar like fresh snow settling over ground I had only ever walked across with caution. The hotel suite became my safe zone, a space where no one asked me to perform, explain, or apologize. I extended my stay without hesitation, not because I didn't have a home to return to, but because I had finally admitted to myself that I no longer wanted to return to a place that had never really felt like home in the first place. It was in that stillness, in the echo of what I'd left behind, that something inside me began to shift. The first thing I did was open my laptop and search for a therapist, not in a panicked, desperate moment, but in the calm clarity of knowing I couldn't carry all of this alone anymore. I didn't need someone to fix me. I needed someone to witness me, to help me unravel the knots I had spent years tying tighter each time I told myself it didn't matter, each time I convinced myself I was being too sensitive, too demanding, too much. The first session was over video, just me and a woman named Lila with kind eyes and a voice that never once rushed me. I didn't cry right away. I didn't even talk about Christmas until halfway through. Instead, I talked about the birthday that was forgotten, the way I always brought home straight A's but couldn't get a framed photo on the wall, the countless nights I sat in my room as a teenager pretending not to hear the laughter in the kitchen that somehow always excluded me. I told her about the keychain, about the Range Rover, about the way no one asked why I left, only how I could dare to. She didn't say anything groundbreaking. She just listened, and in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in years: permission. Permission to feel hurt without needing to justify it, to acknowledge the deep bruises beneath my surface that didn't come from being hit, but from being consistently, quietly dismissed. When Rachel arrived a few days later, it was like opening the door to sunlight after too long in the dark. She didn't come with demands or questions. She came with Thai takeout, 2 bottles of wine, and that calm, unwavering presence that only real friends bring. She didn't ask me to explain myself. She just listened, nodded, and when I finally stopped talking long enough to breathe, she simply said, "You deserved better. You still do." We sat on the hotel bed that night, cross-legged, chopsticks in hand, laughing in short bursts between heavier pauses. I realized then how foreign it felt to be seen without having to overperform. Rachel didn't need me to justify my pain, didn't offer excuses for my family, didn't try to package the experience in some neat, hopeful moral. She just held space for it, and in doing so, helped me begin to believe that maybe I wasn't broken for feeling everything I had locked away. It was during those quiet hours, after the wine glasses were empty, after the city lights outside blurred into soft halos, that I said out loud something I hadn't dared to admit even to myself. I've spent my entire life chasing crumbs from people who were never planning to feed me. The words came out low and slow, not bitter, just true. I had twisted myself into someone palatable, someone small and non-threatening, someone who smiled through exclusion and called it strength. I had told myself that if I worked hard enough, stayed good enough, proved my value over and over again, they would finally see me, finally love me the way I had always hoped to be loved. But they never did, because they were never going to. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because some people are only capable of loving selectively, and I had never been their choice. For the first time, I saw it clearly. My value had never been the issue. My invisibility had been about them, their limitations, their preferences, their comfort zones. And I had been starving on the floor while they fed feasts to someone who had simply been louder in her hunger. I stopped chasing the validation that would never come. I stopped trying to contort myself into someone easier to love. I stopped mistaking survival for stability. That week didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years or dull the ache entirely. But it was the beginning of something new. I no longer measure my worth in text messages or family gatherings. I no longer open social media hoping to see my name included in captions. I stopped waiting for the apology I had earned 100 times over and never received. I began building something else, a life that didn't revolve around being tolerated or proving my usefulness. A life centered on peace, on friendships like Rachel's, on therapy sessions that made space for the things I used to hide, On mornings without dread. On holidays that didn't require emotional debt. For the first time in a very long time, I chose me. And that choice felt like freedom. I didn't expect to hear much after I walked away. I had silenced my phone, blocked the numbers that drained me, and poured my focus into therapy, work, and friendships that felt reciprocal and alive. But life has a way of letting the echoes reach you, even when you've stepped out of the room. At first, it came in fragments. A mutual cousin mentioning in a comment thread that things had been tense back home. A former neighbor, who still followed me on Instagram, sending a private message that simply said, "Good for you." Small signals, indirect and cautious, but each one carrying the faintest scent of unraveling. Eventually, the fuller picture began to form. Haley was struggling. The Range Rover, the crown jewel of that Christmas spectacle, had quickly become a burden rather than a prize. It turned out that beyond the down payment, there wasn't a real plan in place. Monthly payments, insurance, maintenance, gas. None of it had been considered because in our house, consequences had never belonged to Haley. She had been shielded, propped up, bailed out, always. But with me gone, there was no one left to quietly absorb the pressure. No one to fix things behind the scenes. No one to shoulder the adulting that Haley had been excused from learning. I heard she missed the first car payment within 6 weeks. The insurance premium shocked her. She called Cheryl in tears, and for a while, the pattern repeated. The frantic phone calls, the late-night lectures, the half-measured promises to do better. But now, there was no fallback. No quiet sister paying bills on time, no responsible sibling picking up the slack, no emotional janitor cleaning up the mess while smiling through clenched teeth. Haley had always been told she was special. Now she had to be capable. The gap between those two identities grew wider by the day. Cheryl tried to keep the performance alive. She clung to the curated image of control, of a family still intact. She told anyone who asked that I was just going through something, that I'd had a bit of a breakdown around the holidays, that I was taking time away to heal. I knew she was spinning it, painting herself as the concerned, misunderstood mother while carefully omitting the years of neglect, the imbalanced love, the very specific silence she had kept around my pain. But something strange happened. People stopped nodding. Not all at once, not loudly, but gradually. Family members who had always accepted Cheryl's narrative without question began to ask different kinds of questions. They remembered the forgotten birthdays, the missed thank yous, the way I was always so independent because no one ever showed up for me the way they did for Haley. The aunt who used to passively agree with everything Cheryl said started making excuses not to come to Sunday dinners. One cousin told me, quietly and without fanfare, that they had always wondered why your name was barely mentioned at holidays, even when you lived 5 minutes away. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out to correct the story. I didn't try to collect justice like a prize I was owed. I stayed silent, steady, focused on my life, while the ripple effects unfolded without me. The truth is, I had always been the buffer, the invisible glue, the one who held things together, even when I wasn't acknowledged for it. My presence, my reliability, my quiet labor had allowed the dysfunction to remain disguised as order. I had carried the weight so well that they had forgotten it existed at all. But once I stepped out of the picture, the balance collapsed. Suddenly, Haley's chaos had nowhere to land but directly on Cheryl. And Cheryl, for all her rehearsed wisdom and tight smiles, wasn't built for that kind of impact. Without a scapegoat to pin things on, the fractures became visible. The tension didn't disappear, it grew. The lies didn't soothe, they exposed. And the more Cheryl tried to insist that I was the problem, the more people started wondering if the problem had been the silence they helped maintain. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. Watching it from a distance, I felt none of the satisfaction I thought I might. What I felt mostly was relief. Not because they were struggling, but because I was no longer tangled in the illusion. I had stepped out of the role they had written for me, and in doing so, revealed the truth that had always been there under the surface. I wasn't the weak link. I was the one holding it all together. And now that I was gone, they had to face what they had built. Not a family, but a fragile performance that couldn't stand without someone propping up the edges. It happened quietly, not with some grand, dramatic confrontation, but with a text from Haley that simply read, "Can we talk?" No emojis, no passive-aggressive tone, no sugarcoating. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I was ready, wondering what she wanted, wondering if this would be more of the same. But something in me had shifted by then. I wasn't afraid of their words anymore. I wasn't bracing for impact. So I replied, yes, and we met at a small cafe on a side street neither of us had history with. She looked tired. Not physically, but in the way that someone looks when the mask they've worn all their life has finally become too heavy to carry. She ordered tea, I had coffee, and for a while, we didn't talk about anything important. Just the weather, work, surface things. I waited. Then, without preamble, she said, I didn't realize how much you were holding until you let go of all of it. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no excuses. Just quiet regret. She told me things I didn't expect to hear, how the car had become a burden almost immediately, how Mom started turning her disappointment inward when there was no one else to deflect it onto, how she realized she'd been handed so much without ever being taught how to carry it. She said she used to think I was cold, distant, above it all. But now she understood I had just been surviving the only way I could. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She didn't beg for closeness. She just sat there and let the silence speak between us. And I found that I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt something quieter, heavier, but cleaner, truth. Our relationship would probably never be soft, never be bonded the way sisters in childhood stories are. But in that moment, there was honesty. And I had gone most of my life without that. It was enough. Cheryl never changed. If anything, she doubled down on her bitterness. The stories she told about me continued to shift, evolving into something easier for her to digest, something about betrayal, about distance, about how I'd become someone else. But I stopped caring what shape my absence took in her mouth. Her narrative no longer dictated my truth. My life, on the other hand, began to unfold in color. I earned a promotion at work, a real one this time, the kind that didn't come with polite claps but with raised glasses and a bonus that allowed me to move into an apartment that felt more like home than anything I'd ever known. I took up painting again, something I hadn't done since high school, and lost hours in the quiet of my own space, canvas and color becoming a language I had denied myself for too long. I started going to therapy regularly, not just to process pain but to unlearn the story that I was only valuable if I was useful. I took myself out to dinner more often, without waiting for company. I traveled alone, and found comfort in it. I let myself rest. I let myself be. I gave myself what no one else had ever consistently given me: tenderness, patience, attention, celebration. A year later, on the same date I'd walked out of that house and into a hotel room with nothing but a duffel bag and a decision, I made a reservation at my favorite restaurant. Just a table for one. Candlelight, soft jazz in the background. A glass of wine that didn't need to be justified. I wore a dress I bought without asking anyone's opinion, and I sat by the window and let myself feel the quiet satisfaction of peace that didn't come from being accepted, but from no longer needing to be. After dessert, I pulled a small velvet box from my bag and opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate gold pendant in the shape of a key. I'd chosen it months ago, not flashy, not symbolic to anyone else, but to me it meant everything. It represented the moment I unlocked the door out of their expectations and walked into my own life. The moment I stopped waiting for love to be earned and started giving it to myself without permission. I fastened the chain around my neck, finished my wine, and paid the check. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized I didn't feel like a daughter trying to measure up anymore. I felt like a woman who had learned that the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's living a life so full, so rich with your own joy, that their approval becomes irrelevant. And in that moment, I didn't just understand it. I believed it. I never needed their approval. I only ever needed my own.